Hello, all you scaredy cats and kittens, and welcome to the Two Scaredy Cats podcast, where we talk about all things strange, unusual, and paranormal. We're your hostess with the mostest. I'm Stacy, and unfortunately, Kara's not with us this time. She is in Seattle for a convention, and then she comes home for a day, and then she is off to the Bahamas on an anime cruise. But that's okay. We can still talk. I have a great story for us to talk about today. We did go on our trip to Vegas, and we will talk about all that when she gets back when we do our next episode. So you'll have to wait 2 weeks to hear all about our trip to Vegas and how that went. But anyway, in the meantime, I have a story for us today that's actually comes from Ireland. So it has to do with like Irish folklore and all that. And it's actually a story from the 1800s, the late 1800s, almost 1900s, that I came across that I thought was interesting, as it has to do with the Fae and changelings. So I guess I'll go ahead and get right into our story today. Today's story is called The Changling. So in Irish folklore, changelings were said to look like the person that they replaced, mostly being children. A fairy substitute would be left behind while the human was taken into what they called the Otherworld. Changelings were said to look like the people that they replaced, but people always noticed that something off about them. They noticed that they were a little bit different than the person that they were replacing. Like they would have a complete change in their personality. Sometimes they were very sickly all the time, unlike the other person that had been there before. And a lot of times they were like very pale and stuff. So people said that it was kind of easy to tell when somebody had been replaced by a changeling. Changelings were said to look like the people that they replaced, but like I said, people always noticed them being different. Most of the time, though, they would become very sick, like I said, and they would not eat any food. The creature left behind was believed to be a fairy, a spirit of the forest, or an enchanted creature, while the real person, like I said, was taken to live in the other world. Now, there are many stories about changelings, and they reflected people's real fears and were used to explain such things as sudden illness or unexplained and strange behaviors in people. Bridget Cleary was 26 years old when she died because her husband thought she was a changeling. So Bridget was a dressmaker, a milliner, and an egg seller, and she married a local cooper by the name of Michael Cleary, and they had been married for 8 years. They were a happy couple, and they had no children, which during that time period made them unusual and also further compounded by the fact that Bridget was an independent woman. The couple lived with Bridget's father, and because of this, they were able to reside in some recently built labor cottages. Their house had a beautiful view of the whole valley, but it had been built on a ring fort. So in 1895, ring forts were believed to be fairy forts. These forts quickly became places steeped in local tradition and oral history, and they were connected to fairies. They were to be avoided at all cost. So the story goes that in March of 1895, while dropping off some eggs to a neighboring village, Bridget Cleary stopped off in another fairy fort. It's not clear what she did while she was there or what happened to her, but she was known to have a fascination with the fairy folk, and this combined with her fashionable dress, her independence, and lack of children made her something of an unusual person to the locals. Another theory suggested that she might have been having an affair with a local eggman, but whatever caused her to stop so long resulted in her getting a terrible sickness, and she arrived home with a raging pain in her head that confined her to her bed for 10 days and eventually led to her death. Now, when her condition was not getting any better, her husband called upon the local doctor to come see her. It took him a while to get there. For whatever reason, he didn't come right away. When Dr. Crean finally came to visit her on March 13th, 2 days before her death, and he diagnosed her, he said that she had bronchitis. So he left some medicine behind and promised to visit her again in a few days. But her husband, Michael, was no had no faith in doctors at the time, and he refused to give her any of the medicine that was left. A friend of his that had been hanging out with him a lot by the name of Jack Dunn, who was well versed in fairy lore, had a different theory as to why Bridget had become so sick. Jack thought she had visited the fairy fort and that it was not her that came back, but a changeling that was sent in her place. This theory was often used as an explanation for sudden illness, especially in cases of women and young children. Jack argued that the only thing to do was to visit Dennis Gainey, who was the local fairy doctor and herbalist in their town. So the following day, after she got even worse than she had been and last rites had been administered, they went and they got the fairy doctor. The fairy doctor apparently confirmed Jack's suspicions and Michael's worst fear, that Bridget was no longer herself, but a changeling, and to get her back, Michael would have to get rid of the fairy and wait outside of the fort where his wife had visited. Now, in today's times, this probably sounds pretty crazy, but in Rhode Island in the 19th century, everyone believed in fairies because they felt something had to exist for them to blame on the bad things that happened in their lives, and they felt that fairies fit that bill. Because fairies were known to be kind of mischievous, they were considered neither good nor bad, but sometimes, they would play tricks on the humans. So Michael took the herbs that the fairy doctor gave him and forced Bridget to drink them. And he boiled new milk, and new milk basically was the first milk provided by a cow after it had had its calf. And he started to grow very crazed because she began to get worse. So he started spoon feeding her spoonfuls of this concoction until she complained that it was so bitter that she couldn't stand it anymore. And at this point, he decided that she was going to drink it whether, she liked it or not. So he grabbed a red-hot poker from the fire, and he ended up burning her in the face with it. Now, when she started complaining about how rough the treatment that he had been giving her, she had urine thrown at her, and he also burned her in other places with the poker from the fire. Michael started complaining and arguing with family and friends that would come by to see her that she was not his wife because she was too thin and she was 2 inches taller than his Bridget had been. But let's keep in mind, she'd been sick for 10 days, so yeah, she's going to be a lot thinner, and she'll probably look a lot taller too because, as she loses some of her muscle tone and that, she's going to look more elongated. So he started demanding that she identify herself as his wife, and she could only do it twice, but she would get so exhausted that she could not say it a third time. Now, the reason why this is so important is because the number 3 is a big thing for them in superstitions in Ireland. So everything he made her do in threes. So there was also this long-standing belief that fairy changelings were afraid of fire. So that's why he was using the fire also. So he would also hold her before a fire and ask her these questions on top of everything else he was doing. Now remember, this poor woman has been sick for 10 days, so she's obviously starting to lose her strength in that if they're, reading her last rites, which is usually what is done in the Catholic Church when, you're coming to the end of your life. So next, he decided he was going to prepare 3 pieces of bread with jam on them for her to eat. And she was not allowed to have any water or tea or anything with it. When he gave it to her, she had to eat it dry. So she was able to eat the first 2 pieces, but she could not come to eat the third piece. At this point, he got so enraged with her that he threw her to the ground, wrapped his hands around her neck, and forced her to swallow the whole while holding a hot stick to her face. So as you can imagine, this poor woman's just going through it. On top of being sick, she has her husband who's just totally abusing her and stuff. After she failed again, he stripped off all her clothes down to her camisole, and he poured lamp oil all over her and used the same hot stick that he had been threatening her with before to set her on fire. He was heard screaming, "It's not my wife, I am burning," and as he stood over her while she burned. But there was other 8 people in the house at this time while this was all going on who witnessed her death. And they said that on top of doing all this, he also threw kerosene on her to help her burn faster. Now, these people that witnessed her death also participated in questioning her over and over the past 2 days. But when Michael murdered her, they all claimed that they tried to stop him, but he barricaded them and let them, try to get at him. So after her death, he locked these people in the house with the body while he went and dug a shallow grave for her. So there was a massive manhunt for him, because after he did that, he ran off. There was a massive manhunt to find her grave, because he wouldn't tell anybody where he had buried her at. And obviously the other people that were with him in the home were locked in there with the dead bodies, so they didn't know where he had taken her to bury her. So the manhunt took a week, and the police eventually found the grave, and the 9 people that were in the house with them while all this was going on were charged in connection with the case. The court case only took 2 days before a verdict was reached. But oddly enough, the presiding judge would not impose a judgment of murder on account of the fact that everyone involved had truly believed in the righteousness of their actions. They all believed that, what they were witnessing was a changeling, and that everything they were doing was trying to get the spirit of this changeling out of this woman's body. So Michael did get time in prison. He got 15 years for what he did. The 9 other people that were with him also got thrown in jail too. So, like I said, this is a pretty crazy story that happened, about in Ireland. Now, they don't believe as strongly in this stuff now as they did back then. I mean, this was like the late 1800s, early, almost going into the early 1900s. So, people back then had a lot of superstitions still that they were carrying around with them, that, that these stories and folklores that were going around. So, and they have a very big belief over in Ireland in the Fae. It's been said that these fairies would come and steal babies and then leave one of their own babies in its place. And then they would use the humans in their world as like slaves basically for them to do stuff. And then the changelings that they left would eventually just die because they couldn't handle it in our world. They would become very sick. They usually never, if they came as babies, they usually never lasted, more than to the age of 5 or 6. And if they did last longer than that, they were just always very sickly. They were very pale looking. And they would have a major personality change once they had been brought back. But yeah, so that's the story that I have for you guys today. Like I said, Kara will be back with us next time, and we will talk about our trip to Las Vegas that we went on, which was a lot of fun. And there was we have a couple stories that I think you guys would be very interested in. And also, I just wanted to take the time to thank all our listeners, and to wish everybody a very happy Easter. Easter is happening on Sunday around here. And that's all I got. If you enjoyed the show today, please make sure to subscribe or listen to our podcast. We're on any of the streaming platforms. You can also find us on YouTube now, and be sure to check out our Instagram account and our Facebook account. Make sure to like us and follow us, because all your likes and follows and listens help us continue to do what we do. So tune in 2 weeks for another exciting episode of the Two Scaredy Cats podcast. And to all our scaredy cats and kittens out there, remember, curiosity didn't kill these 2 scaredy cats.